The outdoors doesn't warn you. One moment you're on the trail you've hiked 100 times, or rappelling into a canyon you spent months planning, and the next, nature makes a decision that you don't get a vote in. These are the most horrifying outdoor deaths ever recorded, and every single one of them started as a normal day. 7. Richard White and the Grizzlies gaze. Denali National Park, Alaska. Richard White had spent more than 3 decades hiking, and by the time he arrived in Denali National Park for a solo backpacking trip in August 2014, he was the kind of outdoorsman who had earned his confidence honestly. A 49-year-old scientist from San Diego, he'd completed the mandatory bear safety training, secured his 5-day backcountry permit, and carried his camera everywhere. Always within reach, always ready. What he didn't carry was bear spray or a firearm. He relied on experience and caution instead, and for 30 years that had been enough. On his 3rd day out, a grizzly appeared in the distance near the Toklat River, moving slowly through the brush as it foraged. Park guidelines recommend keeping at least a quarter mile of distance. White stopped at roughly 40 yards and raised his camera. For 7.5 minutes, he photographed the bear across 26 images. The early frames showing it grazing peacefully, its massive frame blending into the landscape. Then the final 5 photographs, captured over just 13 seconds, told a completely different story. The bear had lifted its head, looked away momentarily, then turned its full attention toward the photographer. The last image captured its expression. No longer indifferent, but intent. Locked on, 3 hikers found White's abandoned backpack and signs of a struggle hours later. Blood stained the ground. Torn clothing lay scattered nearby. By 8:30 that evening, a helicopter search team spotted a grizzly near what appeared to be a food cache. The bear, estimated at 600 pounds, still standing over the site in a defensive posture. White's remains were recovered the following morning. His camera was found intact. Investigators reviewed the full sequence of images, and what they described was chilling. Not a sudden charge, but a slow documented shift from passive encounter to fatal one. This was the first fatal bear mauling in Denali's recorded history. The photographs he took in his final minutes remain one of the most haunting pieces of evidence ever recovered from a wildlife attack. 6. The Bagram cargo plane. Afghanistan, 2013. A driver passing through Bagram airfield in Afghanistan in April 2013 had his dashcam running when he noticed a massive Boeing 747-400 cargo plane climbing out of the airfield ahead of him. Engines roaring, altitude building steadily, nothing about the takeoff suggesting anything but routine. Then the aircraft began to roll, left, then right, increasingly unstable, losing altitude in a way that communicated immediately and viscerally that the pilots were not in control. Within seconds, it tipped nose first and dropped straight out of the sky. The dashcam captured every second of it, from the first signs of instability through the impact and the column of black smoke that followed. All 7 crew members on board were killed instantly. When investigators recovered the flight data, the cause was as devastating as it was preventable. The plane had been carrying 5 armored military vehicles as part of the US military drawdown, over 60 tons of machinery packed into the cargo hold. None of it had been properly secured. When the aircraft pitched upward during takeoff, the vehicles broke loose and rolled to the back of the hold, crashing through the rear pressure bulkhead and destroying the tail's flight controls entirely. With the controls gone, the pilots had no mechanism to bring the nose back down. The plane stalled, and recovery was impossible from the moment that cargo shifted. 7 people died because the load wasn't strapped down, a procedural step so fundamental it appears in the opening pages of any cargo aviation manual ever written. The footage became one of the most watched aviation disaster clips ever recorded, not because of what it shows technically, but because of what it represents, a catastrophe that was entirely undeniably preventable and that nobody on board had the chance to correct once it was already in motion. 5. Jude and Nathan in the Slot Canyon, Zion National Park, Utah. Jude and Nathan Marimon had named their trip the 10-part gauntlet. 3 weeks, 10 national parks, thousands of miles, ending at Zion. Jude was 22, a mechanical engineering student with laminated topographic maps and spreadsheets for packing lists. Nathan was 19, an environmental science student who believed the Earth could teach him more than any textbook. Shadowspine was their final descent. Unofficial, unmarked, whispered about only on niche canyoneering forums. Its entrance was hidden behind a rockfall, and only few had finished it. For the brothers, that made it perfect. The GoPro GoPro on Jude's helmet was already recording when they started down. They were halfway into the descent by 9:40 in the morning. The slot had narrowed to 3 feet in places. Sunlight came in thin slices. Their voices echoed strangely, faint and delayed. They moved through the rappels with practiced ease, laughing when the rope spun too fast. The canyon felt alive, and they were in rhythm with it. Then a single drop of water landed on Nathan's helmet. He wiped it without thinking. Jude glanced up briefly and brushed it off as runoff. He didn't check again. The sound came suddenly. First a whisper, then a hiss, then a roar that vibrated up through the stone walls. The canyon gave no warning, no vantage point, no exit path. Around the bend behind them, a brown surge appeared, a flash flood. 6 inches of water can knock a person down. In a slot canyon, those inches multiply into 10-foot walls of stone and timber in rage. Jude reached for the rope. Nathan turned upward, hands grasping at vertical sandstone slick with algae. The flood arrived. The GoPro caught the first impact. A violent lurch, a scream, a blur of water and rock and movement, a hand, then nothing. The last frame was brown chaos bubbling and swirling where 2 people had stood seconds before. Nathan's body surfaced 5 miles downstream 3 days later, tangled in branches. Jude was found 2 days after that, wedged under a collapsed log jam, his harness still clipped in. When the GoPro footage is shown in training sessions now, instructors pause just before the roar. A final moment of calm suspended in time, then they press play. For Eric and Jenna Linwood, Wingsuit Flight, the Dolomites 2015. Rico Alvarez had documented Eric and Jenna Linwood's wingsuit flights for 3 years, capturing their near-impossible stunts from dizzying altitudes for a YouTube channel that had become a cult sensation. Part aerial ballet, part Russian roulette. Eric was the showman, aggressive, always pushing boundaries. Jenna was quieter, methodical, built on calculations rather than chaos. Together, they were precision wrapped in madness. On September 3rd, 2015, they were flying a razor-line descent along the 3,500-foot face of Dagger's Edge in Washington State's Dolomites. That morning, Jenna had noticed the wind patterns were shifting. Not strong, but unpredictable. She mentioned it at breakfast. Eric's mind was already at the launch point. Rico watched through his lens as Eric stepped off the ledge. The wingsuit inflated instantly, cradling his body into a glide. Close to the rock, just a dozen feet out, skimming the ridgeline in textbook form. The first few seconds were perfect. Then Rico saw it before he heard it. A shift in the trees below, a sudden backward sway. The wind hit Eric like a physical blow. His right arm jerked violently upward, the wingsuit collapsing on one side. He veered left, overcorrected, and his body pitched forward at an unnatural angle. For a fraction of a second, it looked recoverable. Then came the sound, a dull, brutal crack echoing off the rock face like a gunshot. He hit the cliffed chest first, bounced, and spiraled down through open air, vanishing into the trees like a rag doll. Jenna was already behind him, her wings caught the wind cleanly at first, but panic had shifted her line several degrees off the original vector. She was losing altitude too quickly. Her legs barely cleared the first tree line before hitting the second, one branch catching her left leg, the impact flipping her sideways violently before she pinwheeled through the canopy and disappeared. Rico dropped his camera and ran. It took 40 minutes to reach Jenna. Her wingsuit was shredded, her legs bent grotesquely, blood soaking into the ground beneath her. She was barely alive when he reached her. By the time paramedics were airlifted in, she was gone. Eric's body took 2 more days to locate. His helmet spotted between 2 ledges by a helicopter. He had died on impact. Within a week, the Linwood channel went dark. Every video was removed. Rico returned the hard drives to their families and never filmed another flight. 3. Clara Min and the Flash Flood, Orderville Canyon, Utah, 2018. Clara Min had an engineering mind, calculating risk with the same precision she applied to her structural engineering thesis. For 2 months before their trip, she and her 3 friends had pored over topographical maps, analyzed elevation profiles, reviewed every available trip report from the past 3 seasons. She had even emailed a former guide asking specifically about anchor conditions and flow risks. They had timed their permits to avoid peak monsoon windows. The forecast that July morning showed scattered storms in distant mountains, but Utah was bone dry. The sky was crystalline blue. Clara mentioned that the risk seemed manageable. She had navigated dozens of canyons across the Southwest. This one felt like the others. In slot canyon country, it almost never does. Clara clipped into her rappel line first, testing the anchor, running the rope through her device. Her 3 friends waited above as she descended into the shadowed chute. Halfway down, the sound arrived. A low murmur at first, something that could almost pass for wind. Then it deepened, thickened, became a dull, endless roar vibrating up through the stone. Around the canyon's bend, darkness surged forward. A wall of water, thick and brown, slammed into the slot like a freight train of mud. Clara was suspended 12 feet above the canyon floor when the surge hit. Her rappel line whipped against the wall and snagged on a jagged ledge. She twisted, trying to unjam it, reaching for her knife, but the water arrived before she could ascend. The friends above screamed helplessly as she was thrown sideways by the force, her harness swinging violently before dropping her into the chaos as the flood crested. She vanished beneath the surface. Her helmet appeared once, just long enough to strike a protruding rock, then disappeared as her body was pulled into a siphon barely 2 feet wide. The others scrambled to a higher ledge and waited 30 minutes for helicopter rescue, watching the canyon below fill like a sealed pipe. Search teams found Clara's body the next morning, lodged beneath a submerged rock shelf over a mile downstream. At her funeral, one friend said she always double-checked her gear, triple-checked the forecast, and didn't deserve to vanish like that. New signs now stand at the Orderville trailhead, small weatherproof plaques warning that dry skies don't mean safety. One includes a date, July 22nd, 2018. No name, just the day everything changed for a group of 4 who thought they had planned for everything. 2. The Kamar Daban tragedy, Siberia, 1993. Ludmila Korovina was 41 years old, a master of sports, and one of the most respected wilderness guides in her region. She had led groups through Siberia's backcountry for years with a reputation built on exactly the kind of calm, precise decision-making that kept people alive in places where the margin for error was essentially zero. In August 1993, she led a group of 6 young hikers, ranging in age from 15 to 24, through the Kamar Daban Mountains near Lake Baikal. They were physically fit, trained together for months, and had confirmed favorable conditions with the local weather station before setting out. By day 3, heavy rain had turned the trails treacherous, but they pressed on and reached their planned summit on day 4. It was a hard-earned achievement, and it would be the last thing most of them ever did. As they descended, a sudden scream shattered the silence. One of the young men collapsed, convulsing violently, blood seeping from his eyes and ears. Ludmila rushed to him, and within moments she was struck by the same horrifying symptoms. Panic spread through the group instantaneously. Another hiker gasped for air before thrashing her head against nearby rocks as if trying to escape an unseen agony. 2 others tore at their clothing before collapsing, clawing at their own skin. The remaining 2 tried to flee, but one dropped mid-run, writhing in pain. Only 17-year-old Valentina Utochenko was left standing. For 4 days, she wandered alone through the mountains, following power lines in search of civilization, exhausted, disoriented, and covered in the blood of her companions before Ukrainian kayakers finally spotted her on a river. The official search didn't begin until August 24th, delayed by her inability to speak about what had happened. When helicopters located the bodies, autopsies concluded 5 had died of hypothermia and Ludmila of a heart attack. But the symptoms Utochenko described pointed to something far more acute, far more violent, and far less explained. Theories emerged over the years: military nerve agent testing in a restricted area nearby, industrial contamination from Lake Baikal, toxic mushrooms consumed unknowingly. None fully accounted for the progression and speed of what happened on that descent. Utochenko avoided discussing the event for decades, and when a journalist tracked her down 25 years later, she refused to revisit it entirely. The Kamar Daban incident drew immediate comparisons to the Dyatlov Pass disaster. 9 experienced hikers found dead in the Ural Mountains in 1959, their tent slashed open from the inside, bones crushed, one missing a tongue, and not a single credible explanation ever confirmed. Both cases ended the same way: a mountain that gave nothing back, and a silence so complete it became its own kind of answer. 1. The eruption of Mount Ontake, Japan, September 27th, 2014. Mount Ontake, on a clear autumn morning, is one of the most beautiful places in Japan. The first signs of fall foliage painting the slopes, hundreds of hikers making their way to the 10,062-foot summit shrine, cameras out, lunches packed, the whole mountain alive with the particular joy of a perfect weather day. The Japan Meteorological Agency had recorded unusual seismic activity earlier that month: 52 tremors on September 10th, 85 on September 11th. But maintained the alert level at its lowest setting. None of the mountain's monitoring equipment indicated what was about to happen at 11:52 in the morning. The crater exploded without warning. A phreatic eruption. Groundwater flash heating to extreme temperatures, producing a massive cloud of superheated steam, gas, and ash that burst skyward instantaneously. Volcanic rocks launched at speeds reaching 300 kilometers per hour. Within moments, visibility dropped to zero. The temperature soared. Hot wind and ash transformed the air itself into something that could kill you. In the Ishimura Mountain hut, 40 people crowded into the center of the first floor as rocks punched through the ceiling. Some found helmets. Others protected their heads with cooking pans. The ash and scalding wind turned the shelter into a furnace while rocks fell like hailstones outside. Hideyomi Takahashi, who had been climbing with 8 colleagues, had his iPhone running during the ascent. Photographs of a cotton candy cloud beside the mountain, a sacred gate to the summit shrine, his colleagues making their way up the path. His group lost 6 of 9 people. Nearby, Yasuo Ito had carried a carefully packed lunch. His body was found later with his ash-coated knapsack beside him, his untouched egg salad sandwiches still intact inside a cracked lunchbox. Izumi Noguchi, hiking alone with his compact camera to show his wife what she was missing, captured 100 photographs of the disaster's approach, the final image showing the massive plume looming over a mountain lodge just before it hit. His damaged camera was recovered near his body. Recovery operations revealed the eruption's brutal efficiency. Over 550 rescuers forming lines across ash-covered terrain, described as a bottomless swamp, hardened like partially solidified concrete. Some sank chest deep into debris. Bodies lay half buried, some with multiple fractures from volcanic rocks, others found in protective curls near the summit shrine, clutching phones and backpacks in their final moments. The final death toll reached 63, making it Japan's deadliest volcanic disaster since World War II. What made this uniquely devastating was the nature of phreatic eruptions. They occur with almost no warning even to the most sophisticated monitoring systems, because they don't originate from magma movement that seismographs can track. They start from water, which means that on a perfect autumn morning, with blue skies overhead and 100 people on their way to a summit shrine, there was genuinely nothing that could have told them to turn back. And these were the 7 most horrifying outdoor deaths ever recorded. Which one hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories from the places where human plans meet something larger and less negotiable, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.